Welcome to another video by Pharos Technology. Today I have really something exciting to show you. How to take a subquery and find not just the top quartile of something, the top percent, but let's go find the second quartile or the third quartile with a single query. Because here's the scenario. Let's say that you want to give bonuses to the different branches that you have in your company. You want to give the top bonus to the top 25%. You want to give the next highest bonus to the next 25%. And then the next bonus to the bottom, the 25% on the third quartile. And then, of course, no bonus to the people that are the bottom dwellers in the bottom 25%. But how do you programmatically calculate each one of those sections? And so what I want to do is I want to show you what a subquery is, quickly review that, and then launch right into showing you how to separate those quartiles and give you that data in one query. Okay, let's go. I want to quickly review what a subquery looks like. So I'm going to go up here and I'll go to design view here. What I want is to figure out how much in this particular query, how long my account managers have been in my business. And I want to figure out what the average amount of time is for those particular people. So I just want to take an average. I'm going to average the difference in date between today's date and the hire date. So that's fairly simple, that query right there. So in doing that then, I can run this and I get a single number. Now that's critical. In this particular subquery, if I'm going to use it as a criteria in my other query to figure out who's been here longer than average, I need a single number returned by my query. So I have it in a totals query where it's taking the date difference between the hire date and the current date and then averaging them all together. So average number of months with the company is 182. We got that number. So I'm going to close that, and then I'll open this next one, and you'll notice that what I've done is taken that query and put it down here, and I'm going to expand that a little bit. And what you can see here is the only difference between this query and the query that just built the average only is that I took greater than and then open paren. So my subquery is encased in parentheses in total. So I'm going to be greater than the entire subquery. And then you notice I had a close paren around the back part of that subquery. So that's sitting down here in my criteria line. Okay. So who are my managers now that have been here more than the average amount of time? If I run this query, it runs the subquery as the criteria and then shows the data based on the result of the subquery. So in that way, the subquery remains dynamic no matter how many times I run it and no matter how much the data changes underneath. Whether I've hired new people or other people have retired, that query stays dynamic every time I run it. So that's the value of doing a subquery. But I'm going to need to use a subquery if I want to find the middle quartile, for example, of a data set. So it's easy to find the top quartile. So let's look at how that one does. First, I'm going to run the query totally. I'm just going to find all of the data. I'm going to sort sum of revenue descending. And if we look at the SQL view here, what you see is that I'm ordering by the sum of revenue descending. And it basically is a totals query where I'm simply taking each branch and summing up the branch's dollar amounts. And so when I run this, I have a total of 54 records. Now, what I want to do, just to show you that everything's working, I'm going to drop that data into my spreadsheet. So here, I'm going to show it in my spreadsheet, and you'll notice it goes down 55 records, 54 records plus the header. Now, SQL view here, I can show you that I'm going to just select the top 25%. Now, in order to see the top 25% thing, that's a SQL only enter. In other words, you don't see that in the design view. So if I go look at design view here, you don't see anything that relates to top 25%. But when you run it, it gives me just the top 25% or 14 records. Now, 25% of 54 is actually 13.5. And because it's this odd right in the middle number of between 13 and 14, I'm going to do a little bit of adjusting, and I'll show you where I have to adjust just a slight bit. So what I want to do is I want to copy this, and I want to put that into my spreadsheet just to show that everything's working out okay. And so now I have those branches, and notice we've got the first 14 records, and everything matches from here on up to the top. Okay. That's step one. Now I know I can get the top 25%, and that works just fine. So I'm going to close this. Now, what do I have to do to get that next quartile? Well, in the next quartile, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go down and look at excluding those top 25 that I've already extracted out of the database. So my previous query was this query here, and I'll put it up here in the builder. That query is now right here. This query, as you see highlighted there. Now, that query comes from the previous screen where I just selected the top 25. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, in my criteria row, I'm going to say not in those top 25 records. Okay? That top 25% of records. So I put that down here in my query. Now, here's the critical part. If I'm going to exclude 25% from my record set, and that 25% in the previous query was 14 records, I have 40 records left. If I just take 25% of the next 40, I'm only going to get 10 records, right? 25% is between 13 and 14, right? 13 and a half. So the situation then becomes, when I want to view this in SQL view, I have to actually take, in straight numbers, it'd be 33%. And here's where I had to adjust and tweak just a little bit, because my data set being so small, that 13.5% was rounded up again and gave me 14 again, and ends up duplicating the last record of the previous 14. So I said, oh, give me 32% instead. And that allowed me to drop under and not get 14 records, so that it allowed me to get just the data set I needed. So let's run this. Now, when we look at that data set and we compare it in our spreadsheet, I can drop that right here, and I'll just widen these out here. And you'll notice that this record now is the start of the next quartile. And it goes down to that record, and it contains 13 records. So now I've accomplished my second quartile, okay? Now I'm going to minimize that. Let's go see, what do we have to do then to get the third quartile? So I've got the first 25%, I got the second 25%. How do I get this third 25%? Well, a little bit of tweaking to my query really does it quite adequately. I'll go to design view here. And what I have here in the SQL view, what I have here in the SQL view is, because I've excluded 50% and I want half of the remaining 50%, which is 25%, that upper 25% of the bottom 50%, I then select 50% of what is left over, and I exclude the top 50%. So I'm excluding the top 50%. That leaves me 50% left, and I want half of that. So when I run this, I get the next quartile, and let's compare it to make sure I got the right data. And I should be able to paste that right down here and open that up a little bit. Let's scoot over here just a little bit. And we'll scroll on down, and you'll notice that this record right here should be the record for 305118 at the bottom, and that is correct. 305118. And this top branch number here is 920781. So I'm getting the third quartile just fine. So now how do I get that last bottom quartile? Well, that becomes fairly easy, just tweaking a couple numbers again. So let's minimize, and let's close this one, and let's go look at this one. And here I'm going to adjust, and I'm going to exclude the top 75%. And what happens then in my SQL view here? Well, you can guess it. I'm just going to select everything that's left when I exclude the top 75%. So the top 75% should bring me down right to the record that last record I just took from the third quartile. And when I run it, let's go compare it, make sure. So this record, let's open it up a bit. This record should be 103,516, and yes, it is. And this record should match, meaning the last record of the data set. So I only had to tweak that 133 versus 32% in the second, but remember, you're dealing with percents. Therefore, as you slide through your database and exclude a certain number from the top, when you select the percent of what's left, you've got to adjust that percentage so that you get just what you want out of what is left, which is, of course, a higher percent than 25%. And you get the numbers just fine. Now, these will remain dynamic. If my data set got large enough that the rounding wasn't a factor, I could change that 32% for the second quartile back to 33 and be more accurate in the data sets to follow. So I hope you've enjoyed what you got here. If so, please hit that like button, and I hope to see you on the channel again later. Thanks.